B1, it's taking a second. There we go. We are live. Hello, everyone. We got Al here, my friend, my good man, who also joined me for Superlit. There's Marcel, Maxine, Brennan, and Ken. We got Scott, who's amazing and wonderful, and
Also
Robert.
the labor pool overseer of the Tan of Four.
And Robert, the voice of Supernatural Encounters himself.
Hello.
We got Brennan here. He said he's looking forward to this.
Good buddy.
Before we do anything, I just wanted to share. This will take only a moment, but if I can share screen, wanted to provide a beautiful picture that's very wholesome for the whole family, and it's just that. And I think that sets the stage. Absolutely wonderful.
Jeez. Luke with his mouth open.
Keep it in the family, you know?
Horrible form.
Oh God.
Not
a fan.
Yeah. Family love maybe taken a little too far in some places.
They may have gone a bit far in a few places.
Yeah. But actually, I think that's a perfect lead-in. Scott, you were the only one out of all of us to read the novelization of episode 4, so I don't know if you could give us some insight into some additions apart from the movie.
Sure. Yeah, I did a speed reading version of Alan Dean Foster's novelization of A New Hope, and it does include quite a bit of extra information. Not a whole lot, but it's been about 25 years since I originally read this novel, and it tells you the same basic parts about Luke's sort of adolescence on Tatooine here. It matches the audio drama, if you've listened to the audio drama, pretty well. But one thing I noticed, particularly at the end with the throne room scene, when they're getting their medals, and by the way, Chewbacca does get a medal in the novelization, if you didn't know, but they sort of go into Luke's head and his psyche and his motivations for why he's joining up with the rebellion, going on this dangerous mission against the Death Star. And obviously he's a hero, destroys the Death Star and comes back. But at the very end of the novel, I'm talking about the last paragraph, it's pretty clear from Luke's perspective that he joins the rebellion and he does all this craziness just to get with Leia. So the friendship with Han, that's secondary. The joining the rebellion and the good of the rebellion, that's all secondary, just to getting with Leia. Now, obviously, Alan Dean Foster, he didn't know that they were brother and sister in 1979 when this was written. I just thought it was funny that they don't make Luke the traditional hero. He's just trying to get with the girl he likes, and that's his primary motivation for everything he does in the first novel there.
That's pretty good. That's pretty funny. When I read the Marvel comics for the first time, I was struck by how much they wanted to ship Luke and Leia, and how burned they must have felt by Return of the Jedi. But I can imagine that was a lot of people back in the day. Before we go in depth on these comics, what do we think specifically of just A New Hope as its own movie, as its own thing, as a film? How do you guys think of it in the context of Star Wars? Like, is that your favorite or anything like that?
We'll go this way. So we'll start with Robert and end with me.
Okay.
So Robert, what do you think about Al's question?
That is difficult to say.
Okay.
Want me to go first?
Go for it.
Probably a good idea.
So with the movie, right? Well, obviously, all of us have seen it a million times. You sort of know how it goes, and even if you got exposed to the EU in a couple storybooks, a couple young reader books, like I read The Glove of Darth Vader before I actually saw the full movie. I knew roughly what Star Wars was, but I mean, once you've seen the movie, you kind of know the whole story, and you just want to know more. So when you compare it to something like, Alan Dean Foster's novelization or the audio drama, what's clear is like what could have been. That's really what sticks out in my mind is, okay, they should have really started the film with Luke as they do in the audio drama, because he's obviously the main character of the whole original trilogy. And rather than starting off with the droids and sort of like going around to get to Luke and Leia, the audio drama is right there in your face, and you see Luke and his situation on Tatooine, trying to get off, and his ideas of joining the academy and flying a starship and all that stuff. That's really relatable, and I think it's a tragedy that some of that stuff was taken out of the film, particularly the interaction with Biggs Darklighter.
Yes,
because that is a focal point at the end of the film when he joins up with the rebellion and flies an X-wing. He sees Biggs, and that part is in the film, but we're missing that portion early on.
that
And
connection.
the connection, I guess you can say, oh yeah, he knew him from Tatooine, but it just hits harder when you can actually see those deleted scenes with Biggs on Tatooine and him just hanging out with his friends. I think that's more relatable, and I think it's a tragedy that was taken out of the film. But overall, I don't have anything negative to say about the film overall. There's some slow parts maybe on the Death Star, but the real tragedy is taking out some of those deleted scenes, I think. And if you read this novel, you just get a lot more. So I have no complaints about the novel either. It's solid, and it's a lot different than even something like Steve Perry's Death Star novel later on, where a good chunk of that novel is basically the retelling of the Death Star portion, of episode 4. And you find yourself, when you read that novel, you skip a lot through it. But this one, I mean, a lot of good information here. I don't think I have any complaints as far as like, oh, I just want to kind of breeze through it because I know what happens from visually from seeing the film so many times. So I think both of them are very good. And I don't really have any complaints overall, other than that it should have been expanded and include those scenes at the very beginning with Luke on Tatooine.
Fair. I think part of the thing, though, this isn't my turn. I think part of the thing that made Star Wars so big was that it started off where it started off. Now, I agree with Scott. I would have rather have had those scenes first. But I think it's the strikingness of you open up the movie, you have the title crawl and the text, and then right after that, you have spaceship, lasers, a talking droid. Immediately it gives you something that is entirely unique to Star Wars that you don't get in any other sci-fi space opera anywhere. It's very it really gives you its character within those first few moments. So I think while I would have preferred that, I think in the long run it's probably best how it turned out, and that it would just be expanded upon later through novels and audio dramas and such. I'll give it over to Al, but we also have somebody else amazing with us to give his perspective, which is Brennan.
Oh, my buddy.
Howdy. How are y'all doing?
Doing all right? What are you
Doing
eating?
well.
Brennan,
Eating
glad
some
you could
potato
join us.
sticks that I just made because I've not eaten today.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
All right, Al. So your perspective.
All right. So I'm gonna go sort of bullet pointed here. The movie. There's not a lot to say about the movie. I think every single person on Earth has seen it at this point, and if they haven't, they're going to at some point.
One little thing I'll say. My friend that I've known since middle school, his father is a big Star Trek person, and I've asked him, "Do you ever plan on watching Star Wars?" He's in his 40s. He said no, because I want to be the only, not because I don't have any interest, but because I want to be the only one at parties and stuff that can say I've never watched it. So
one day
I
this
thought
will
it was a little
change.
funny.
It is his destiny. One day. But no, so for me, it's hard to separate the context of all of the other parts of Star Wars, not just the expanded universe, but also like Empire and Jedi from A New Hope. However, last year I had the opportunity to show two of my friends who'd never seen Star Wars A New Hope, and that kind of gave me a little bit of a window into what it's like to not know any of this other stuff. Not even the two direct sequels. And man, the thing about A New Hope as a movie is that it's just a great movie. I just love it. It's just a great, dead simple movie. It's a lot of fun. They don't waste too much time. That said, I do agree with Scott. Seeing anything else from the movie, I want it. I want it in there. I want to see it. Which brings me to, I'll do the audio drama first. The first time I listened to the audio drama, which I think was 2 years ago, I flipped out. It was the coolest thing I ever heard. Hearing young Mark Hamill do Luke Skywalker for several hours, get several hours worth of new young Mark Hamill Luke Skywalker content was like the most amazing thing I had ever heard. And even though it's a lot of that is based off of the deleted scenes, I had not seen the deleted scenes at that point, so that was still new. Even that stuff was new to me. It's one of my favorite things in the expanded universe. The radio drama. It's just like a perfect expanded version of the movie. It's like the extended edition Lord of the Rings equivalent to Star Wars, but without the video, right? But it's simply perfect in my opinion. And now the Marvel comics, I'm not as big a fan of. They're not bad. Specifically the adaptations. The adaptation of New Hope is not bad, but there are definitely better issues in the Marvel comics. And from what I remember, Empire was also the adaptation of Empire was also better, but Return of the Jedi was not as good. But no, as a foundation for a universe, I think A New Hope is one of the best. I think that's why. Well, in a lot of ways, it's because of Return of the Jedi, but New Hope as the starting point is just perfect. So, if anyone would like to take the baton here.
How about Brendan? I will say, if there's any noises that you hear, it was supposed to be just me and my mother today. My brother was not feeling well, so he's home. But he's somehow well enough to make a lot of noise with the dogs. So I'm going to mute myself. I'll give it to Brendan.
So my just overall thoughts on the movie, the audio dramas, and the adaptation.
Just sort of like a baseline.
Okay. So A New Hope, I saw it for the first time in 2012. I would have been 6 years old. I saw it with my grandmother, who was a huge fan. My other grandmother, so my dad's mom and my mom's mom were both there. And then my dad's aunt, so she was there as well. And I remember as we sat down to it, I'd just gotten a Lego Millennium Falcon from Walmart right prior to watching it. So this is all I know about Star Wars is Han Solo, little blaster, Millennium Falcon. I hadn't seen really any live action movies before Star Wars. I'd seen maybe a couple of things here and there, but this was really the first thing that went from, cartoons and animated movies to the live action world. So I didn't really know what to expect. I was told to cover my eyes during the Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen skeleton scene because I was told that was scary. But instantly, as soon as there's this ship going in space, you just get this feeling of we're not here. Not even just the a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, but that Star Destroyer shot, you're instantly transported to somewhere that isn't here. And it's magical from start to finish. We get allusions to this Clone Wars, this past with Ben Kenobi, Obi-Wan. So we have this sense that there is a grand scale, a tapestry of stories that is in this universe. So it does an incredible job of world building. First of all, having a story. It has, the classic story of the normal boy turns out to have a huge destiny, and now he's part of a larger world, that kind of trope. And it does that so well and establishes these characters so well, this Empire versus Rebellion story so well, while also creating an amazing backdrop, while creating a glimpse of stuff that we don't fully see expanded on yet. Aliens in the Cantina, reference to past wars, Fall of the Jedi, all these organizations. It does an incredible job in being, like you said, kind of the stepping stones into the Star Wars universe. I don't think you could have told a better story as the introduction to a grandiose universe better than really A New Hope did. And it's had such an impact. The fact that anyone hasn't seen it is wild to us. I remember before we clicked play, my dad's aunt, her name's Melita, she said, "Oh, and the boys haven't seen it yet." And she was surprised. She was like, "You've not seen Star Wars yet?" And, you know, I thought instantly, like, wow, that's interesting. Even as a young boy, I was like, wow, so everyone's seen it. I guess I'm late to this. And that's kind of the feeling you get. It's just iconic in so many ways in terms of the lore it builds, the introduction to Star Wars, and just the pop culture appeal that goes to everyone. These characters, these scenes, they all just ooze with nostalgia, even for someone who was nowhere close to when it came out. I can't imagine what it would have been like when it first came out in theaters. It's just nothing like it before. It's truly wild. Then the audio drama is great. I too had not seen the deleted scenes yet, so there was a ton of new stuff in there. Hearing, like you said, some of these voice actors who were playing the characters of the movies return was just great. I've not read the scripts. They publish them as little books, right? I've not read those. Those are pretty expensive. So I just listened to the audio, and it was really, really cool. I liked it a lot. What was expanded. It was great, but those deleted scenes perhaps were rightly deleted, in my opinion, because the movie just flows so well when you sit down and watch it. So these are cool expansions, but I think for the flow of the movie, it was good that they were excluded. The comics are fine. They're a little hokey. They're a little hokier, I'd say, than the rest of the runs, which are telling original stories. The adaptations felt just kind of weird, but they're fine. They're not bad. So I guess that's sorry for the long-winded, baseline into movie, audio drama, and comics. Did I miss any? The novel's fine. It has a little bit of new stuff, probably the least of all of the Star Wars novel adaptations. Yeah.
All right, Robert, we gave you time. How you feeling?
Well, I'm afraid I've never listened to the audio drama, so not much to say there.
It's okay.
But I agree with Brennan about the Marvel adaptation. There's really the interesting stuff starts after that.
Yeah.
The novelization, it's been a long time since I've read that. But it's really interesting going from that to, say, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which of course was also written by Alan Dean Foster. And the way that chooses to expand upon A New Hope as opposed to The Empire Strikes Back. For example, the way that the film handles the scene where Leia gets interrogated, it kind of just, there's the immediate dread of the moment, but after that it just sort of moves on. Whereas Splinter of the Mind's Eye, you learn that she's still freaked out by it. And I probably shouldn't be talking about that book at this point, since we're trying to focus on A New Hope at the moment, but okay, so
It's
the
okay
scene with
it's okay.
So the scene with Obi-Wan and Luke, where they're talking about the Force and the Jedi and the rise of the Empire and all that, it does a really good job of establishing all these things for people who have never seen not just that film, but anything Star Wars. And the bit where he's talking about Anakin, and Luke says, "How did my father die?" One thing I really appreciate about that scene is Obi-Wan's visible discomfort, which in the context of that film by itself, you can just go, well, of course, this is his friend who died, and he would rather not be talking about this. But of course, taking the prequel trilogy into account and The Empire Strikes Back, you know, there's more to it than that. Quite a bit more, in fact.
I think part of what makes that, I don't mean to cut into you, I think what, as Brennan was talking about earlier, and this is with a lot of things, whether it be fantasy or sci-fi, what you want in a world or a new universe, and this happens in Dune too. It takes like 100 pages for it to even really get into the plot, because there's a lot of world building and talking. But part of building a world is making it feel alive, and like there's a history that has happened before you even started viewing it.
An elaborate backdrop. So important.
And I think
Absolutely.
Alec Guinness did an excellent job of acting as if this is all history to him. And so, wow, you don't even have to know about episode 3 or the prequels or even episode 5. Just seeing, even if it is just as simple as you think, oh yeah, well, he's sad because he's talking about his friend. It's in the way that he portrays it that makes sure there's so much history behind whatever it is that he's thinking about.
It really feels like he's lived the life he talks about, right?
Yeah.
The way he sells it, the way he talks about stuff, the way he looks off to the distance as he's talking to Luke, like he's trying to recollect all of this stuff that he's lived through. It just feels so real, so authentic. He is this older guy who's had this huge mysterious past that would get elaborated on later on, but it's the world building there. And he feels alive, a breathing, living person who experienced a lot of stuff that we don't know about yet. He didn't just seem like a character, and this is where his journey began. Alec Guinness plays it like he'd already done so much.
Like he'd been playing this
there's
character
that
for years.
there's that famous edit of Revenge of the Sith interspliced in that conversation with. That's super famous edit, and that always gets me. I'm not gonna lie, but man, it's by the strength of Alec Guinness's acting, it lines up perfectly, even though George had no idea.
No,
it's just fantastic. I love that.
It worked out so great.
And didn't mean to interrupt you, Robert. I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yes. And given how much Alec Guinness made it known that he didn't think much of Star Wars, taking that into account, I really appreciate that he didn't phone it in at all.
Very true.
Good seeing you.
Get better soon, Max.
Just talking about A New Hope overall. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no. Go for it, Scott. I was about to go off on a tangent. Go for it.
I was just going to say A New Hope, really uniquely out of all the films, even the prequel films, I think when you jump into it, there's so much already going on as far as the Death Star plans and the Anna V4 and how it was chased from this rebel planet where they stole the Death Star plans and beamed it up to the ship. There's just all this backstory, even with Luke and with Leia, and Leia on her diplomatic mission, and all this stuff about her father on Alderaan. There's a lot to catch up on, and that in and of itself just makes you want to know more about it. That really draws you into the film, unlike any of the others, I think. Whereas some of the other films they'll start out, okay, this is the basis, and then they sort of go into a direction where you want to know more at that point. A New Hope actually starts out at that point, and I think that's what really made it special and unique out of all the films.
We're dropped right into what's going on. We're dropped right into the thick of it, right? And that doesn't always work for movies. Sometimes you feel like, oh shoot, what is going on? And you're playing catch up the whole time. But somehow expertly the movie catches you up perfectly, just enough to where you don't feel lost as you go along. Enough that me as a 6-year-old could understand these are the bad guys, these are the good guys, they're fighting, and the story that was going on, right? But enough that it's still intricate and interesting for people of all ages. And I think it strikes a balance there really well. I wanted to ask, what do you guys think of the A New Hope title? Because it was first called Star Wars, and the film does do justice to that title. These are wars in the star. So it does make sense in that regard. How do you guys feel about the later retitle? Because I personally feel it fits really well for the tone of the movie. It's an optimistic feeling movie, despite all of the evil stuff that's going on in it as well. So do you guys feel the retitle fits the movie?
I'm fine with the retitle for the most part. If only because it's much easier to talk about A New Hope than it is Star Wars. I don't have to clarify as much. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. I would say I think absolutely. Even if you are excluding any other knowledge into this, but let's say we all know about everything else. So for including that, but even if you're not, what do we know from episode 4? We know that the Empire is the big bad, but we also know that they're in control. We know that they've been in control for some time because even Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen talk about these things like it's been a thing forever. And if you include the prequels, of course, and we know that it's been at least 20 years. The EU for a while said it's 30 years, but it get redacted. Regardless, it's been a while. So there's not been much light in the world. So episode 4, by bringing in Han and Leia and Luke, this trio, you introduce this new hope into the galaxy that will usher in the end of this threat.
Yeah, they've used a couple of subtitles. They've used From the Adventure of Luke Skywalker. They've used Star Warriors, a lot of different iterations of that. Obviously, from a practical standpoint, once you name the first movie Star Wars, and then there's other material, whether that be other films, other stories, you have to give another title because you can't use Star Wars because Star Wars is referring to that film. So I think just from a practical standpoint, it's fine. I don't think it's the most creative, but it works for what it is.
Serviceable.
Yeah.
It doesn't conflict with any other title, so when you're abbreviating it ANH, it doesn't. There's not another movie that's named that in the franchise, so it's easy to differentiate everything.
Remember when they could actually they had notations in all of the essential guides to where like Champions of the Force, what that is by the acronym, and then like somewhere around the 2000s it just became ridiculous. They did away with that entirely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, I wanted to say, I'm pretty sure Brian has done this before, but somebody in the comments asked if Brian will make a video defending the expanding universe and explain why it was always canon, like other EU content creators have. But I think you already have done that.
I've done several videos like that, yeah.
Yeah. So I think you just got to go scroll around there a bit more. But maybe you could leave a...
Maybe I should make my channel easier to navigate.
Just make it defending the EU, copy Matt Wilkins' playlist.
Yeah, good new playlist.
Yeah, just go watch Matt Wilkins' videos. He does a pretty good job.
Robert, how do you feel about the... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I go ahead, Robert. I'm good.
Yeah, I was just... Yeah.
How do I feel about the
title change?
The new title.
I think probably it's my least favorite of the titles of the main 6, but it works.
Yep.
What would you name episode 4 if you had the power to?
I was gonna ask that. As funny as it sounds, The Force Awakens could have been a decent title for episode 4.
I mean,
Isn't there like a meme video where it's like all the Star Wars titles have the wrong name and it switches around?
I've seen that.
Yeah, I think that's the one they did was A New Hope, The Force Awakens. I kind of want to expand on two things to you guys said real quick. About A New Hope dropping you in the middle of things, like you said, Brennan. I think despite getting dropped in the middle, literally in the middle of a conflict, it is still the single best starting point for anyone who wants to get into Star Wars. It gives you, despite hitting the ground running, you get all the context you need. If I were to make a Transformers comparison, as I often do, one could argue that Transformers the movie does not give you nearly as much context as it should, unless you're familiar with all the characters, at least all the season 1 characters. You're just kind of like, oh, I don't know what's happening. Oh, everybody's dying. Why is this happening? What's going on? Whereas Star Wars, you get the context as you go along, and you get it fairly quickly. And to expand on something Robert said, I have always felt that A New Hope has a particular feel that none of the other movies. I don't even know if they go for it or they nail. They feel different. It feels distinct in a way from even Empire and Jedi, in a way that I think is really interesting. And I think you can see that a lot in the stuff that came out before Empire. So like the Marvel comics and Splinters of the Mind's Eye, where you can see almost like an alternate reality where they go down a different path. I think just because it was the foundation, you can see like, oh, instead of building a house, they could have built, a gas station or something. You know what I mean? Anyone follow? Okay.
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
A New Hope,
okay,
I think, has a feeling of newness to it, if you understand what I mean.
And in a sense, the lore of the movie's kind of a rebirth too, with Luke and Leia finding their place in the galaxy and starting this fight against the Empire. So it's a rebirth. It's a new, even for kind of the in-universe lore, it's the start of a new era. The what Al was talking about with the tone of A New Hope, it's very it's A New Hope, right? It's the original Star Wars movie. It's very hard to explain it, but that movie just feels so distinct, despite everything that came after it. The rest of the trilogy it's a solid trilogy, but Empire and Return of the Jedi feel more connected tonally, I would say, despite one being more dark, one being more, some would say cheesy, but more light. I love Return of the Jedi. But they're more connected, I'd say, tonally. Something about A New Hope was just different. Is it the way we're viewing it in hindsight? Maybe, but it just feels different. It feels dramatic. The scenes, the establishing shots, it feels different. It feels new, like Robert was saying. It just feels so distinct. And it's very hard to put that into words, but it's just unique. It's a unique movie. Anytime you're watching a scene from it, it just feels so decidedly and distinctively from that movie. It's just hard to explain.
I think part of it is that it feels a lot grittier. Not to be like a 1980s comic book, but like it feels a lot grittier than the other two. That in part that's just because everything looks really dirty in that movie. But also like it feels like these are a bunch of these guys just kicked open the door to this military installation and started shooting people. It feels more direct in a way.
Was
whereas
it lower
Empire
budget,
a little bit more
that
maybe
contributed to that feeling?
It could be that. I think it also Empire and Jedi feel but a little bit more like adventures. Like not to say that A New Hope doesn't, but like Luke Skywalker is trapped in the blizzard as the snow's coming down. He gets attacked by a monster, and then they in Return of the Jedi, they befriend a tribe of forest
little teddy
creatures
bears
that help them. Yeah, little teddy bears. Whereas A New Hope is like, yeah, I paid a criminal to smuggle me across borders, which is, you know, is
Well,
an
I mean-
adventure too, but
A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back both have scenes of a bloody severed arm lying on the ground.
that's true.
also
That's true.
Also true.
They feel a little more
Also-
polished, perhaps.
I think
And
that's
despite Empire being more dark and Return of the Jedi, some would say being more for kids, I disagree with that. But that's kind of the consensus I see broadly in the hive-minded online circles. Kind of paints it that way. A New Hope is just less polished, it seems like, and maybe that contributed to it. It was George's raw passion that brought it off the ground. And he wasn't working with everything. No one knew if it was going to succeed or not. So George was giving his all into this. All of his passion was going into this. And he had to make certain things work a certain way. The way that it was done, a lot of it was shot out on location in the desert for Tatooine. So that just feels kind of raw. The effects feel kind of raw. It's maybe a little less cleaned up and nicely oiled as maybe the second or third movies were in terms of production, which could account for the tone feeling kind of gritty, as Al was suggesting, despite kind of an optimistic tone for the movie too. So it's very interesting, all of these aspects we're talking about.
Yeah, I agree. Alex, if I may ask a question
Go
for the
for it.
panel here.
Go for it.
For those of you who have read the comic, I didn't read the comic, but I have read the comic, but not recently. So, what do you think are the distinguishing factors, whether it be in the audio drama, whether it be in the novel, or in the comic, that really stood out to you that are important, that were either a difference in how things played out on screen, or anything like that? I can think of like two examples. One is, everybody knows about R5B4, right? And the Skippy the Jedi droid, that story and it was always portrayed, I thought, in the film that R5B4 blew himself up on purpose so that R2 and 3PO wouldn't get separated. But in the audio drama, I noticed it's R2D2 actually works on R5B4 and makes him blow up.
Makes him blow up, yeah.
So
I like that.
talk about savage, man. R2D2,
Sabotage.
like, yeah, he's
No one
he's a
said
real
that
criminal.
R2D2 is the most morally
Right.
person there. He gets the job done.
R2D2 gets the job done, man. He
It
doesn't mess around.
Morality's not really in the picture.
Yeah, it changes the whole character of R2D2. And the other one is when Luke's selling his speeder in the marketplace to get the credits to pay Han. Obi-Wan actually Jedi mind tricks the guy that they're selling it to, in order to like deceive him to pay up so that they get the 2,000 credits to pay Han, and that's kind of dishonest, right? I was like, wow, Obi-Wan Kenobi just
Gotta do what you gotta do when you're on the
Morally
run from the Empire, huh?
But I think the prequels actually help with that because it's and I'm not going to get too much into that, but I think it kind of helps. Ben Obi-Wan, he spent his whole life devoted to this one thing, and it all came crashing down because he made a promise when all the other Jedi told him not to. But he was going to hold it true to what his master told him to do, regardless of what anyone else said. He straight up says in episode 1, if you don't allow me to do it, I'm going to do it anyway. So there's that, and then you have with like R2. Remember, he's the only one of the droids that has never lost his memory, ever. And he knows Luke. He was there when Luke Skywalker was born, so he recognizes that name. He's going to do everything in his power to not leave. So that gives me even more motivating factor, or for more motivation for him to do that to the R5 droid.
So that completely changes the context of the scene. If we watched the scene in the movie and it had been more clear, it had been crystal clear that R2 sabotaged the other droid to get there, you're immediately kind of thinking this is a scallywag of a droid right here. It kind of changes the way that you view the character. He is a rascal who does whatever it takes to get things done. Perhaps he's even violent. If I had been watching it as a 6-year-old and it was clear that this droid destroyed the other droid, I'd be thinking, is he a bad guy? So perhaps that's why it's more ambiguous in the film rather than the audio drama. For they don't want to show the hero droid just straight up murks another droid right in the opening to get what he wants. But it's
Especially
very
since
interesting that way, right? It shows R2's motivation, and I guess sadly means that Skippy the Jedi droid is firmly non-canon.
Yeah.
Sadly,
I think,
There's a lot of mourning going on over that one.
what a
and I don't
loss.
want to get too much into the EU, of course. I want to keep it mainly the movies, but I will say, just the movies alone, I think the movies make it pretty clear, to me at least, that R2D2 and C3PO are people, apart from just droids, which is a whole other discussion. But I
You
do
mean
like,
they're people in a suit?
yes, no, I like that.
They're 12
glad
Scandits
that-
in a trench coat.
I'm glad that you're not denying Anthony Daniels exists as a person.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a slight, like, little mention of, because I remember when we had our conversation like a year ago in Super Lit about, when Arhol interviews Art or C3PO.
Yeah.
It was, and then you add in the audio drama here, and it's like it's really clear that these aren't just like programmed beings. These are beings with thought, with feelings.
Very true.
Especially R2D2 and C3PO as an introduction to this world, who can have their memories wiped and stuff. Like they casually mention that in the movies, but like these are people to us when we watch it. Like these are people we care about when we watch these films. So it's an interesting thing that Star Wars has been very hesitant to ever actually really delve into with droid rights.
We started, not to get more into the EU, but like NJO started that a little bit. C3PO is like looking at a spark dying out. He's like, oh, am I going to die? I would have loved to see that continue. But even discounting that, like you said, from the movie, it was apparent to me as a kid when I was watching it, these aren't just like program beings. I guess I wouldn't have had a concept for program, but it was apparent to me it wasn't like my phone or computer, even though they were mechanical beings, right? Right from the get-go, when they crash on Tatooine, one of them's complaining about everything. One of them's driven with purpose. They have distinctly different personalities, and they already have wishes, wants, requests, complaints, a lot of them for the golden one, of course. But that's an interesting point. They definitely seem like individuals, despite being droids, which is it's sad Star Wars didn't delve into that.
They're closer to like Optimus Prime than they are to Data.
Until we're introduced to Luke, they are the main characters of the film.
That's true.
I will say Anthony Daniels really carries the audio drama. It's hard interacting with a droid that doesn't really speak English. It's sort of like dealing with Chewbacca. I mean, you really got to work your magic to make the scene sound interesting. But Anthony Daniels really carries it. And some of them are original, like with the labor pool overseer and the Tantive 4. I just find that
that's a great
hilarious. They try to like over dramatize some of these characters in certain aspects. So like they're getting boarded by the Star Destroyer, and all of the princess's guard are going to face off against the stormtroopers, and there's this labor pool overseer. He's there getting the droids all ready. And he's like a little bit, he's got a couple of screws loose in his head. Like he's really too into his job, and it's just hilarious. Definitely recommend that scene.
Oh yeah. Well, with the to cap off what you guys were saying about with R5 or R4 with Skippy the Jedi droid. I think Sheev brought up in his most recent video how it really is a giant convenience that Skippy just happened to blow up right as he bought it, right as the Lars bought him, and not like later that night. And I have been thinking about that a lot recently. I was like, oh, that is a little bit of a weakness of that movie, isn't it? Not like a huge thing, but it's like, that's not amazing. I would have preferred if they showed either it probably would have been better if they just showed Skippy like electricity coming off, like he's sparking or something, or like he's making like a grinding sound or something like that, or show R2D2 being a boss and just murking him behind the scene. That would have also been equally cool. But the other thing I want to say, and this is a little bit of a follow-up.
Sorry. R2 tricks Luke later on in order to engineer his own escape.
That's true. he's feisty. He's a little. He does not play by these
He's a
rules.
naughty
He
little
does not believe
droid.
in them.
Yeah.
To go off something Scott said, I really found Han getting his
My
reward
power might be
money
turned off.
later.
So,
You're not muted, Alex.
yeah, my power might be turned off, so
Oh.
this might have to end abruptly. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Hopefully not.
We'll see what happens, but if it ends abruptly, I appreciate you all.
Fair enough.
I just had some workers inform me, so yeah.
Super chat Alex, so that he can pay his power bill.
It's chat, save Alex's power.
Keep going, but if it
Save
ends,
Alex.
then that's why.
Well, all right.
Just so you
well,
know.
Go ahead,
fair
Alex.
enough. Scott, you should. What struck me was at the end, towards the end, when they discuss Han's payment, and they bring up that Princess Leia doesn't have any money, so they have to pay him in batteries, something along those lines.
It's equipment and raw materials like metals, precious metals. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I thought it was batteries for some reason.
And there is a
that
little
scene
bit
was really good.
in that scene. You can kind of make out in the movie he's like moving crates, and who knows what's in that crate? Is it coin? Is it materials? I guess it could
something
be
he could probably barter for credits later on, trade sell, etc.
Sure.
Yeah.
But like that was really clever. I as a dumb person, I'd never thought about that. I was like, oh wait, no, she wouldn't have any money. That's true. But that scene was a really good scene, and that the Han voice actor for me was a little bit he was okay. He's not the worst Han voice.
It wasn't like
I've ever
super
heard.
cheesy, which I worry when people impersonate Harrison Ford, it could be absolute cheese. So it wasn't
That's true.
but it wasn't good either. It was just okay.
It was
okay.
cheesy.
It was serviceable. But that was
It
probably
was
his best
fine.
scene. So
Yeah.
I appreciated that at least. And I really like that scene.
Going back to the droids real quick, I was thinking about how, like, why did it even have to be that R5 or Skippy blew up and Luke was interested in that unit instead of R2? And the reason why it's necessary for it to work is because it shows the motivation of the droids that they need to be with Luke, right? Because without engineering that situation to where he's interested in another droid, we don't immediately get the sense that the droids they want at least R2 to be with Luke. And there's a sense of motivation that the droids have to get to Luke from R2's perspective. And you don't get that unless Luke is interested in another droid, and that droid is then taken out so that the droids get together. It added peril at the beginning, because when I first watched it as a kid, I was like, oh no, they're not all going to be together here. As it was trending to go that way. So it adds peril, and it immediately makes clear droid's motivation, and that they, at least for R2, they have to be together and they have to be with Luke, which I think is interesting. Going back to a question Scott asked a while ago about what stood out from the book, comics, etc. In the book, I think they elaborated on Tuskens, from what I remembered. That was one thing that stood out to me. Obi-Wan spends a little bit of time talking about Tusken Raiders, more so in the book than in the movie, from what I recall. And so in the movie, it's like, what are these guys? These are Tusken Raiders. These are bad guys in the desert. But then in the book, Obi-Wan talks about, or Ben talks about them being more savages, and just elaborates a little bit more in the book. It makes more of a point of how dangerous they are, I feel, in the book than the movie. I mean, we get that firsthand with the show don't tell moment when the Tuskens literally try to, impale Luke with a Gaddafi staff. But the book makes more of a point, I feel, of, wow, these are dangerous outlaw savages, these primal beings out in the desert. So I think there was more of like 2 or 3 paragraphs more in the book than in the film, from what I recall. And I think it went into a little bit of the specifics of the culture, but it's been a little while since I read the book, so I can't recall exactly.
It goes into moisture farming and how they can get water.
That's right. Yeah.
From the desert.
That's pretty cool, honestly. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, so the book does have some cool stuff in there, but it's not as it doesn't expand on the movie as much as the prequel novels obviously did a lot, especially Revenge of the Sith. Empire and Return of the Jedi probably established a little more new stuff than A New Hope did. It was more of a one-to-one, I think, than subsequent novels.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit unfair to compare it to something like Revenge of the Sith. Obviously, the circumstances are different, but I definitely wasn't bored at all reading Alan D. Foster's A New Hope.
His prose is perfectly good. Yeah,
it was entertaining all throughout, despite having watched the film a million times. So,
what's interesting to me
he was
is
one of those guys that did all those novelizations. He did Aliens, or he did Alien. I don't know if he did Aliens, but he did Force Awakens back when that came out. He did all those. He did a bunch of novelizations. He was like their go-to guy. I like his writing.
What's really fascinating about the novel to me, I just pulled it up here, is that it predated the film, obviously, like soon to be a motion picture. And then there's subsequent ones following it. But it's so interesting because I just can't imagine what it'd have been like for people who read the book and then went to see the movie. And in one of the more civilized age books, the one about novels, there's an article in there by a guy who read the book first and then saw the movie. And so he read the book. He was a fan of sci-fi. And in the article, he described how after putting the book down and seeing on the back, soon to be a motion picture, he was like, okay, so it's going to come out in a couple of months in theaters. And he was thinking, he recalled thinking, as he writes in the article, if they get half of the stuff that was in this book right in the movie, that could be a pretty half decent movie. And so he was like, this is going to be good. And then he went to see the movie and his socks were knocked off, basically, is what he recollects. He was like, far exceeded expectations. They got everything he wanted in there and more. The visuals were on point. So I think it's interesting because for some people, their start of their Star Wars journey was not the Star Destroyer going overhead or and the start of the movie. Their first introduction was this and picturing these events, which I think is interesting. And Alan Dean Foster does a good job because obviously Alan Dean Foster had seen this, or at least the scripts. So he'd seen portions enough to write the book, but and describe the book, of course, in the writing of the novel. But for the people who read the book before the movie, I'm so curious what they visualized compared to what they would then see in the film. It's just very interesting to me.
Yeah, that would definitely be a unique perspective.
Yeah.
What do we think about Lord Tyon and that whole beginning of the audiodrama, where it's really extra scenes? We get to see Tapwara and Raltier and Alderaan and all these extra planets.
That's the best part for me. That was like,
how do you feel about that?
Perfect.
Tell me what you think about that, Al.
I loved it. I thought that to me, that's when I was really getting hooked on the audio drama. I put the audio drama on. I had a moderately long drive. I think it was like 2 hours. And when they got to the scene with Lord Tyon, that's when I was fully engaged. And I was like, this is gonna be a legendary drive here. Listen to all this stuff. I have not read. I think it was Empire that adapted that scene. Did they do that, or I could have sworn one of the comics adapted specifically the Lord Tyon stuff.
It's the Empire series, and I think it's verbatim. They just take that verbatim and put it in a comic book. I think it's like trade paperback 3 or something of the Empire.
I need to hunt that down.
Are you talking about the Darklighter arc?
No.
No, it's the one
or might be in the Darklighter. Yeah, it was when they adapted the Lord Tyon interaction from the audio drama.
It's in this one.
I had already read that before the audio drama. So as I was listening to it, I was like, I feel like I've seen this before. I wasn't exactly sure, but then later I found out that there was an adaptation of those events in comic form as well in panels. Because I was like, why does this sound familiar? You know when in the EU you're like reading something and you're like, I feel like we've done this story before somewhere else, but I'm not sure where. And I can't have done the story before because it's happening now, So it was weird. But that was all very interesting stuff, though, as well. That was right at the beginning of the audio drama, right? Or towards the beginning, right? Yeah, it
I think
started
the first
off
hour and 10 minutes, roughly, are new, quote-unquote, material.
Is new material,
Some of that, Yeah, some of that is deleted scenes. Some of that is like the Princess Leia stuff where it's all.
I remember thinking, when is the movie gonna start? As I was listening to the audio drama, because there is a lot of new material. So I was like, okay, when is this gonna be familiar? Like, where is this going? How's this all gonna match up? So it was quite interesting. With the audio drama, the returning voice actors are by far better than the substitute ones they got, and I think that's its weakest spot because it feels so authentic. And then when you hear one of the characters who's not the character, you're like, and it takes you out of it a little bit. At least I think it's that's the
Hashtag
biggest
not
flaw
Bail
for me.
Organa.
Bail Organa is
Hashtag
really
not
good.
Bail Organa.
He's really good, but he's
Um,
not the one I grew up with.
He's not Jimmy
Well,
Smits,
yeah.
who would have been like 20 at the time. So I think Princess Leia's voice actors solid. Not, I would have preferred I would have preferred all of them, but
Yeah.
of like new voices, I think,
I think
hers
Leia
was probably the best.
Do we know why
Absolutely.
they couldn't get? Do we know why they couldn't get the original for all of them? Was it budgetary
I'm assuming
issues
they just
or
weren't
lack
interested.
of interest?
Yeah, they
I'm
might have
assuming
chopped
they
it.
Carrie
interested.
Fisher,
The only
though,
one-
Carrie Fisher was super interested in Star Wars around the time it came out and afterward. She did a ton of stuff like Star Wars related, so I'm surprised she wouldn't have been interested for it. Harrison Ford, I can see
Scheduling
why he wouldn't have
conflict?
been interested. He had a lot going
Oh, yeah,
on.
no, he was.
He
no
didn't
shot.
care. Like, yeah.
Her, and I think Obi-Wan was all right. He was a little bit stern. He was a little bit harsh for my taste, but he wasn't
He
terrible.
Well, Leia has that torture scene though, which I felt uncomfortable. Like I almost skipped it, just because she did a very
It's
good
bad.
job of not sounding happy.
Yeah.
She does a
It
great
was-
job in that portion, but then when Alderaan gets destroyed,
Yeah,
she's like, "Oh, poor Alderaan."
It sounds mocking. It sounds
That's-
sarcastic.
When there's like a
Poor
nuclear bomb
Alderaan. I got
destroying-
tortured. You guys just got evaporated. Get on my level. Yeah. I'll say, I don't know
The
if you guys
torture
agree
scene
with
made
this, but
me
I think
feel
Darth Vader's was the
uncomfortable,
worst
too.
one. I think Darth Vader was the worst voice.
no
Maybe,
shot.
yeah.
Absolutely. I hate it.
It's just because James Earl Jones, and I guess
You
people
can't beat
have been
James Earl
talking on
Jones.
video since he passed, but James Earl Jones just
Yeah.
passed. Rest in peace to an
R.I.P.
iconic legend. But he
Mufasa.
can't be replaced, and that's exemplified in the audio drama. It's instantly clear that's not Vader. Who
That's
is
just
that?
a guy with a voice filter over him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And James
Yeah,
Earl
that
Jones
was-
didn't
There's
need a
no-
voice filter.
there's
That was just
there's
him.
no resonance, and with Obi-Wan Ben, I felt that Alec Guinness played the character with like wonder, he's been in the universe, but he's still amazed by what's going on in the universe. He's an old mystic. When he's in the cantina, like all this life, he's explaining it to Luke. It's almost like Obi-Wan seeing the galaxy again through the eyes of Luke, and he enjoys
See
that.
if you follow. See if you
There's-
follow this analogy. I think Alec Guinness is like Ewan McGregor is like the older version of Ewan McGregor from Episode 3. This guy is like the older version of Ewan McGregor from Episode 2.
I would argue Episode 1. He seemed quite bland, quite stiff, and I think Episode 1 Obi-Wan was like the stiffest Obi-Wan we saw in terms of
To me, it was just like
range.
it was just harsh in ways that I do not expect from Obi-Wan, where Obi-Wan is very much warmth and all that stuff, and this guy was
Like
just,
as I was saying, kind of
direct.
Alec Guinness has this wonder in his performance, and that wasn't there in the audio drama. There wasn't this like wonder sense that I got from him, which is kind of disappointing. But again, the voice acting from non-movie voice actors wasn't so bad that it completely took me out of it. It doesn't ruin the whole thing,
Hey,
but it is like, oh wait a minute, that's not them for a minute, you know.
Yeah, I think the silliest part is with Jabba's gang, and Han runs into some people with like heater, and there's one called Squeaker. There's Big Bunchy, who is actually in Han Solo at Star's End. So since Brian Daley did the audio dramas, he brought in some
Yeah.
of his background lore for that. But there's one Han called Squeaker, and I guess he's offering Han a job when he already took the job for Obi-Wan and Luke. but that one is just a little bit too wild, a little bit too silly in my opinion.
How many different Jabba Han interactions do we have? Like
Yes.
in Star Wars depicted. We have it depicted in the comics, the audio drama, the film, the revisited, remastered film where Jabba's finally the green worm. But
Yeah,
all of this is stressful to me as someone who likes continuity, because what's the actual interaction? Who is actually with Jabba? As a maximalist, I want to say, well, all the interactions happened. We just saw bits and pieces from all over, you know?
In the audio drama version of events, is it Jabba or is it Mosep Benid?
Well, it's Jabba.
It's not Jabba at all. It's Heater, and
It's his goons. Yeah.
it's like an adaptation of the scene without Jabba. So I kind of lean towards that one, honestly, as my I
Like his
have the
henchmen are there and he's not
non-special
there?
editions, so I count those as the canonical version. I do not care for the special editions, especially
Jabba
like
is in
2006.
here, and it's just a couple paragraphs, but Jabba is in here.
So do you count it as that because, Al, because you don't think Jabba would have traveled out there, so you prefer that it's his henchmen there? Is that what you're saying? You prefer the henchman interaction?
That's part of it. The other part of it is that I really don't like that scene in A New Hope. So if we can kind of minimize that, I'm fine with that being like his henchmen coming to remind Han in the audio drama. I am less fine with that scene as it is in, say, the special edition.
Everything we know about Jabba is that he likes to keep to himself in his palace or on his sail barge. So do you guys think that it's kind of surprising that Jabba would go out himself, as seen in the special edition, right? Jabba slithers up to Han. Doesn't Han step on his tail? But yeah, Jabba slithers out there. I don't see that he would have. He would have sent his goons. He would have sent Mosep Benid or Squeaker or any of these guys out to contact Han for him. Why would he waste his time going into town?
He already took out Greedo, right? So Greedo was Jabba's henchman. I think there were a couple other bounty hunters that it mentions in Rebel Dawn that are actually looking for Han. And even with other things, like even with some of the games, there's other henchmen that are with Jabba that are actually named, that have expanded universe backgrounds and such. But by that point, I think it makes sense that, okay, Jabba really needs his money. You know, he's really after Han. It makes sense for him to.
He's going to go out and do it himself.
He's on Tatooine anyway, right? It isn't a stretch for him to go to Mos Eisley, I think.
Yeah. In the original version, we have the human, and then in the Marvel comic, we have who would later be like the retcon was that he's like his like guy that just goes by the same name for some reason, but is like his like go-to.
Mosep Benid. Yeah.
Mosep Benid.
And
isn't he in? He's in Return of the Jedi, or is he in New Hope?
His species is in there.
I don't think
it's him, is it? Oh, they did. Okay.
Unless he's dead by then.
So I know that Mosep Benid got retconned, but did the original human Jabba ever get retconned as like it was actually another character? Because I don't think the EU ever did anything with like there's a human Jabba masquerader anywhere. Because you'd think that's something the EU would do, right? Like, oh, there was Mosep Benid who would say he was Jabba, and there was a fat human dude, and he would say he's Jabba. When did we get access
to those deleted scenes? When did we get access to them? Because that's sort of my question. Is if we got them alongside,
or was it sooner?
It was in the 90s.
We saw them before. It was in the 90s?
At least. It might have been earlier.
There might not have been enough time for them.
Yeah.
There might not have been enough time. Like like somebody would have had to come up with that and then execute the plan before the special edition came out, and then it was canon that Jabba was there.
I mean,
so they wouldn't have a
Mosep was retconned, and I don't see why they couldn't have just like said, yeah, there were several people who said they were Jabba, you know?
They could, but that specific scene is like that can't happen with the guy, with the big guy. It has to be with Jabba. That would be the only problem. That would be the problem that I would see is like.
So do we think that the original interaction was Jabba, Mosep, and some henchmen then? Like just compile them all together for like in lore
Mosep was way later, wasn't he? He was like a few months after.
But in one of the comics they mentioned their interaction in A New Hope as well.
So
like, they met up before or after, I don't know.
So most have the need. There is a alien that they had a costume. I don't know if he's actually in the film A New Hope, but there's a character denoted from the original film, not the special edition. That is Mosef Beneath, and they have that archived in the official photos. Now with the special edition, that completely changed. There's a whole new group of characters. There's Boba Fett. There's Lello, and they created,
lost the Wolfman.
What's that?
We lost the Wolfman, right? Lack Shivrak disappeared for the special edition.
I think so. But he's still in things like Tales from Mos Eisley, right? That short story. So
we know they were still there.
Right. They are still in like the lore. But as far as, okay, what's the exact scene of events where Jabba and Han meet in that scene? I guess you have to go by G-Canon, right? Which is the special edition, the super special edition. But there's been various iterations, and that's been changed over and over. So
one of the other things I wanted to mention from the audio drama that I didn't get a chance to was that this is somewhere along during episode 4, but when Tarkin has like another guy talking to him, and there's a conversation about possibly at some point overthrowing the Emperor, and once they do that Vader would be easy pickings, or at least easier than if the Emperor was still alive, which I thought was a really interesting discussion, that it was something that Tarkin considered doing.
I think they expand on that in the Death Star novel a bit.
Yeah, it's definitely present there.
They do, and it's even in some of the early Essential Guides. Like I think if you read Tarkin's entry in the first Essential Guide to Characters, it talks about, he has the Death Star. If he destroyed the Rebel base at that point, would he go after Coruscant? That was always a real thing, a possibility. Obviously, he got killed, so it didn't end up being anything. But yeah, that was always something. And I don't know if they got that from the original audio drama. I guess they did, since that was 1981. But that was always part of the background lore. But it was interesting, and I guess Admiral Mahdi was supposed to be his right-hand man. Like he was looking to be in on that coup and being the second in command of Tarkin.
So in terms of conflict and lore for minuscule things between adaptations, was there any that's more glaring than the Han Jabba scene? Was there any spot that's super distinct like that, where it's like, the audio drama, the comic, the novel, the movie, they all tell different stories for the same thing? Was there any other spot like that? Because I think they worked well together. Like the new stuff seems to flow and fit well between the scenes, but there is kind of like different versions of Jabba's interaction with Han. Was there anything else like that you guys noticed?
I think the Jabba Han thing is the biggest interaction. I don't think it's necessarily the audio drama's fault, because Jabba isn't even in the audio drama. There's just other scenes that are in there. I'm trying to think towards the end. I mean, there's some dialogue with Biggs meeting Leia and having Luke introduce Biggs to Leia and all that. Where Biggs is a little bit shy to Leia, and he kind of runs off after he's introduced. So everybody's kind of intimidated by Leia. That's an interesting characterization. He also talks about to Luke, you finally found your dream girl. And if you read the Empire comics, obviously Biggs is with Dantel's in the second trade paperback. So it's like, I mean, Biggs has his girl there too, but you don't know that yet, because this is 1981 compared to 2000.
Yeah, the WayBack Machine series of live streams were going through the EU in publication order. So what are you talking about, Scott?
I have no idea. Edit that out in post.
You don't know that Leia's meant for Luke. Come on, guys. I've been shipping it since 1977.
Yeah, there's some weird stuff. In hindsight,
I'll tell you, when I showed my friends Star Wars for the first time, my one friend, she was super into Luke and Leia, and the other one was as well, but not nearly as much as the first one. And I was like, maybe don't get too comfortable with that ship. Maybe pull back on that.
It's kind of funny. It seems obvious they're siblings later, even though George hadn't decided. Even their names, like a lot of parents will name their kids to have the same beginning letter. You know, like I have a lot of friends who all of their siblings, their names start with the same letter. So it's kind of funny because it works so well that Luke and Leia are siblings, despite the twist. It just kind of makes sense after George did that. But yeah, it's kind of funny. I remember in the comics, in the Marvel comic adaptation, there's a big kiss, between Luke and Leia. Yeah,
I started it with
he
that.
showed it at the start.
Yeah.
So I don't. You guys might disagree with this. I think the most interesting thing to come out of the Marvel comics, and this might be a little bit of a backhanded compliment, but I do mean it, are the covers.
The covers are good. They are good.
The covers are really good. They're really nice looking covers. Oh yeah, where they fight. Yeah, they fight.
That's the Droids adaptation, and they go in with Wait, I forgot we were going to talk about Droids. Is this the Dark Horse run or?
This is the Marvel, the end of the Marvel one.
Oh, this is the Star Marvel run.
Yeah,
Are we discussing these now or later?
Whenever. I just have them up just in case because my place is loud. So
I don't have much to say about them outside of they're cute. They don't add much to the expanded universe.
I mean, I guess it's cool to know that Anthony Daniels and R2 fell into a pit of groundhogs. I guess we can know that happened.
I didn't know there are groundhogs underground on Tatooine.
Well, there are, as you can clearly see.
Apparently, that's something.
Go Tar.
Those are probably Jawas. Derobe Jawas.
Those are unevolved Jawas or devolved Jawas.
Yeah.
No, they're probably what Jawas eat.
We also have this thing.
Ooh. Yeah, I remember that.
It's an acid lizard.
My same friend who loved Luke and Leia, her favorite character were the Jawas. She didn't like anybody. She was like, my favorite characters are the Jawas. They Utini, you know.
Yeah. So with the Droids comics, I'll just throw in my 2 cents on the Droids comics. So I really like the Droids comic run, Star and Dark Horse. I think they're both really fun. I love the Droids cartoon. My least favorite part is the adaptation of A New Hope. Star Wars, according to the Droids. It's the last 3 issues, I think, of the original series. And it's just really not great compared to the rest of it. So
silly.
I take some of it to be canon. So in my head, the droids did encounter some vermin, some Tuskens, all of this stuff. Some of these little interactions did happen. They can easily happen between the scenes. But what can't happen is as soon as it gets to the Death Star.
Yeah, because
there's a scene where C-3PO literally ducks under Darth Vader's lightsaber, or R2, one of them.
Well, I mean, to be fair, Brennan,
ducks under their lightsaber. That did not happen. So, can I just say my explanation real quick?
Okay, I'm just saying.
I think you and I have a similar idea.
My explanation is probably one of the times that Arhul sat down with the droids, or some historian sat down with the droids and was like, "What happened during the Rebel Alliance days?" C-3PO was like telling this magnificent story where they were way more involved in the actual events than they were. Where C-3PO was like, "Yeah, we were right there at the fight and everything." So this is probably an exaggerated account afterwards by the droids.
I have a more specific take on that, because you and I have the same idea going on here. My idea is that this version of A New Hope is what C-3PO told the Ewoks.
I would love that.
This is because it's the end of droids and Ewoks. This is his version of A New Hope to the Ewoks. But now we don't get to see
actually, I kind of really like that.
I like that too.
We know that he is telling them the story in Return of the Jedi, telling them the story.
And they would most be interested in other little vermin creatures. They would like.
And the Ewoks would be super interested in C-3PO as the protagonist. So since he's this golden deity to them, they'd want to hear about him front and center. So C-3PO puts himself front and center in the original story. And that actually totally makes sense.
This might ruin it a little bit, but when C-3PO goes, Darth Vader, he's talking about when he ducked underneath the lightsaber.
And just
maybe ruined it a little bit. All right, anyway.
The Droids cartoon, just this last point to connect it to the Droids cartoon. It's like C-3PO does have a history of stretching the truth, where he says freedom is everybody's responsibility, you know, and he has that martial arts thing that he learned, and he thinks he's more powerful than he is, really. So
he thinks he's hot stuff.
Yeah,
I will say, I have to be contrarian and say to both Al and Brennan that there's several cuts in the movie where we cut to the reaction.
Well, yeah, I do think
characters. So
I do think that the events where they're traveling the Dune Sea did happen this way. I take anything that does fit.
The Death Star. It could have happened when they cut the camera.
No, it couldn't have happened. There's no way. The droids are literally behind Luke in that shot. I'm pretty sure they can't be over there.
I think Brennan, you and I think we're on the right track. I think these are tall tales, whether told to Arhol or Vornal, or told to the Ewoks before they go and they eat a
now, in Tall Tales, there is an element of truth. So is it possible that between dodging Jawa blaster bolts, they were dressing as Tuskens and escaping from acid lizards and little voles underneath the surface of I think it's possible. Anything that doesn't contradict the actual movie, I think could play out. Like in Phantom Menace, there's I know that Phantom Menace hasn't happened yet in the WayBack Machine timeline, but there's a bunch of tie-in media to Phantom Menace that takes place literally between sequences. The audio drama for A New Hope has many scenes that happen between the cuts in the movie. So this stuff in the Dune Sea, I think it could have happened. The droids are wacky characters. Of course, they're going to get into some shenanigans. I like the idea that all of this that you see on screen was happening. It just expands the universe. I find it fun. But as soon as C-3PO starts to recollect and account for everything that happens as soon as they're with Obi-Wan and Luke, that's when he gets a little too big for his britches and elaborates and exaggerates the story. That's kind of what I think. I think it's a mix of some of it happened, some of it didn't. With like
theoretically, they could C-3PO could have seen like a little weasel thing out in the desert, and then when he's relaying it to whoever, he's like, "Oh yeah, we met a whole society of them. Yeah, we met." Or
he sees a little lizard walking by, and it like tries to eat his toe, and he's like, "Yeah, this little lizard tried to eat this giant acid lizard tried to eat me and R2," you know.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I think it's funny. There's English
here.
There's English right there on all purchases are final, but English in Star Wars is called High Galactic Standard.
Yeah,
is what it's called. Yeah. So there's some High Galactic Standard instead of Arabesh right there. Was it West End Games that established High Galactic Standard? I think it was, right? Because Leia writes her name in English and signs it, and then they said it was High Galactic Standard.
You know what I love though is that this whole little section here where they're at the wherever they're at, and again this whole little wacky thing here that I just quickly glazed over means that, you know, the bartender was racist, told them to leave, so they get out of the bar, and while we have the whole scene, the entire iconic scene in the Mos Eisley Cantina,
chopping off the arm, meeting Han, all that.
We have all this with C-3PO and R2-D2 happening outside.
Who's going on outside? George should have turned the cameras around to capture what Anthony Daniels and R2 were doing outside, but alas, we had to stay with the arm.
The audio drama. The audio drama has a different version of these events where they have to go. Don't they have to go negotiate with the owner of the? They go into the used droid store or something, and they have to talk with the owner.
They do, yeah. So is that the same thing that's being depicted in the Droids comic?
I don't remember. I don't think so. I think they just made some up.
It's the same guy that they bartered with earlier, as heard in the audio drama.
I like how R2-D2 is just the wrong color. Just completely wrong. Just nothing. Not even close.
This is a great Luke
literally the opposite.
So, in terms of adaptations, I want to know what all of you think of each one. I'd say the droids one isn't great as far as adapting A New Hope, but it wasn't trying to be great. The Marvel comic series arguably was trying to be great, and it really wasn't. It kind of paled in comparison for me. The novel was trying to be the movie, and it did perfectly serviceable job. It's entertaining. It's the movie on page. The audio drama goes above and beyond with deleted scenes and new material. Brian Daly did an absolutely fantastic job with it. And so the audio drama exceeds all of the other adaptations in its adaptation of A New Hope. That's my kind of rundown. What would you guys say?
I hate that. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that R2 wrong colored R2D2 doing judo moves to get out of the way of the lightsaber.
The limbo.
I hate it. It's bad.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you, Brennan. I love the audio drama. It's one of my favorite things in the entire expanded universe. It's great. It gives me young Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker, an hour's worth of that. That's perfect. I love that. And of new content, just straight up new content. The Marvel comics are like, they're okay. They are firmly sub like X-Men of the time.
There were
like
6 issues,
around the same.
right?
The first 6 issues. Now there are things in the Marvel comics that are really good and really up to standard of the time. But specifically the opening arc, I'm like, this is, if you were picking up comics, you could pick up X-Men for the same price and get a better deal.
Totally.
Even well, Spider-Man, sure. A bunch of things. The Droids comics feel like not even just this is a little bit broad, but not even just the adaptation of A New Hope. They feel like something out of time. They feel like 1961, 62 Gold Key comics. They feel like the Scooby-Doo comics of the early 1970s. They feel like something that is completely out of place. Between the aliens that show up in like the first issue, where they just look like they're just like green people with ears.
They're just like pastel blobs and shapes.
They're just all the coloring is wrong. It's really fascinating. Not necessarily in a good way, but in sort of like an archaeological way. It's like, oh, that's really neat that these are 20 years out of date. The adaptation, like I said, is not very good. It's really weird. It's I like the idea of showing it from the droid's perspective, but like Brennan said, it's like, I don't think that R2D2 dodged Darth Vader's lightsaber. However, when I say I view it as like them telling a story, I do actually really like that. I think that's really funny. Especially imagining R2D2, or not R2D2, imagining C-3PO just lying to all the Ewoks. Just lying.
R2's just sitting there beside him like, what is this guy on about? That's not how I remember it. Yeah.
And I've not read the novelization, so I don't know. I know before we started, we were talking about like there was like a manga, and there was a junior novel and a new junior novel, all kinds of things, but I've not read any of those. Lots of picture books. New Hope has so much stuff. So if you like New Hope and you want to see something, you want to see New Hope done a different way, there's something out there for you. Whether it be comics, books, etc.
If I could briefly say, your point about the Marvel Star Wars issues being so suboptimal, I would argue that despite being a super wacky story, issues 7 to 9, 8 for Aduba 3, and Han's little adventure on Aduba is arguably better and more entertaining than the original iconic A New Hope story as told in the Marvel issues. It sounds kind of crazy to say, but it's just wildly more entertaining and interesting and good. It's just better. It's kind of wild.
No, I 100% agree with that.
Can't wait to talk about Jackson next time.
It's going to be fun.
We got him up there on the shelf.
Let's go.
How about you, Scott? What did you think?
Yeah, I can't argue with any of that. I think, the comics are what they are. They don't add a whole lot. But the audio drama, it was just so carefully put together, and so much has been drawn from that over the years. I think of like the Little Golden books. I can't find the one with Luke and Wendy, but it's mentioned in that audio drama when Luke is interacting with Obi-Wan. He had met Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan had saved him and Wendy, and that whole story is mentioned in 1981. And then later on in the 90s, they came out with this golden book that tells that story, like verbatim, and it's just wonderful.
And there's
so much.
Luke
was put into
Skywalker's
that.
Walkabout, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, that
I
comic
think-
adaptation.
Yeah, there's a comic adaptation too. You're right. I forgot about that one. But yeah, there's just so much into that. I think of Lord Tyon and how he's this, he's supposed to be working for the Empire. He's this sort of evil guy, but he's looking out for his own intentions, right? He's sort of kind of humble. He's the only humble Imperial. You notice that. He's like, oh, I'm just a minor nobleman from a lesser house. I guess the Tyon cluster is a lesser house, maybe compared to Alderaan, which is a core world. But I just find the characterization and the nuance of that kind of interesting and funny. And like, there's other things. Tarkin, obviously, the plotting against the Emperor, but also when it's evident that the rebel fighters, go into the trench and have the Death Star planted a way to destroy it. He's actually looking to get off the Death Star and save his skin. Whether in the movie that's not the case. He's like, evacuate, no, I'm all bent of triumph. He's not like that at all in the audio drama, which is a different perspective. You can say it's a contradiction, but there's just so much more in there, and it just really makes you consider these characters a lot more.
You know what I'd say to that? I'd say what the movie presented is what he showed to his other officers, but in the audio drama we got what he really thought in his head.
Yeah, that I go with that. That works.
I agree. That's fine.
So since we've kind of covered all the bases, I guess all that's really left is to ask everyone what was some of your favorite moments from the movies. I want to start with not my favorite moments, but mentioning the only part, and this is a very minor gripe that I have with the movie itself, only because I retroactively tried to defend other things because I'm mean, but a lot of people kind of rag on my Jedi Academy trilogy. And one of the things that I always hear mentioned in several views across, I've looked at blog posts about it, I've looked at old subreddit places about it, I've looked at old forums. One of the things that always gets mentioned in the Jedi Academy trilogy is the blob races and how they don't matter, and if you cut them out of the plot, it doesn't add or subtract anything, so why include it? I would argue that Star Wars has done this forever, because when they're on the Death Star trying to save Leia and they go down the trash chute.
So true. That's
what purpose does this slug creature in the trash can add to anything? Why is it there? Why did the Empire let it be there? Do they even know it's there? And why, if you cut that out of the movie, you miss nothing at all. It is not necessary to the plot whatsoever. So if it's okay in everybody's favorite New Hope, then it shouldn't be an issue in Jedi Academy.
That is so true. The Imperial organization is a galaxy-spanning empire. How much money is running in it? They can afford to build a moon-sized space base, but they can't afford to scan for life forms that are hitching a ride in their trash heap. They can't afford to eject it. You think better sanitation teams or people dedicated to cleaning up their trash heaps.
Somebody threw away their pet Dianoga, and he just lives in the trash.
Flushed it down the toilet.
Right. Or maybe they thought he was dead and he wasn't really dead. Premature burial in the Death Star trash compactor.
like they're goldfish in a toilet, but it turns into a gigantic monster.
That sounds pretty sick.
Can we get that Tales of the Death Star just so I know why that thing's there?
Comparing some of the adaptation medias just for perspective, like the audio dramas, of the audio drama adaptations of the films, I think A New Hope's the best, personally for me. It just felt like it added the most. In terms of comics, I'd say A New Hope's one is the worst. I'd say that the following two are better, a step up. As far as novels, for the original trilogy, A New Hope's might be my favorite, actually, of the A New Hope novels. I like Alan Dean Foster's prose more than Donald Glutz and Joseph Kahn, right? That's his name. Their prose was a lot more dry to me than Foster's. Foster felt like he got it more. Maybe he was more closely working with George on it than the other two were, but he felt like he got the spirit of it more. It doesn't compare to the prequel novels, though, of course. And then
Oh, I thought you were going to mention Approaching Storm, because that doesn't compare to episode 4's novelization at all.
that's very true. Alan Dean Foster lost it by the time of Approaching Storm.
Yeah, the mojo is gone.
I think George let his friends write all the novelizations. So Donald Glut and Alan Dean Foster and James Caan, I think they were all friends of Lucas, whether they went to film school or something like that. They were associated with him. Yeah.
So would you guys say similar in terms of quality for audio drama comic novel adaptation of the films? Kind of similar?
I agree. I agree with audio. I fully agree with audio. I will say I think Return of the Jedi's comic is much worse, if only because it cuts out a lot of the best moments. Like, I don't even think you get to see Anakin's face at all, and if you do, it's a tiny little throwaway panel. I have not read the novelizations, so I don't know about those. But
I think I'm correct in saying that some of the character descriptions differ a bit in the novel.
probably. I know Yoda's does in Empire Strikes Back. I know specifically that one because he's blue.
Yeah, he's blue. Yeah.
I think R2-D2 is described a bit differently.
That rings a bell, actually.
Might be.
And I think the novel described Obi-Wan as scruffy. That's not really how I picture Alec Guinness. Alec Guinness seemed more distinguished than scruffy to me, despite being a hermit.
I forget what novel, but one of the novels, I think R2 has the repulsors where he's able to fly. I think that's in one of the original trilogy novels.
Which we then see for the first time in Attack of the Clones, is it? Yeah, was that the first place we saw that? Yeah. Crazy that it took that long.
No. I don't think he has those in the droid show.
He does not.
There's a bunch of other gadgets, but not that. I don't think.
I don't think he does. You're right. There's a lot of stuff flying in that show, though. There's like speeders everywhere, so the characters are often, in the air. So I had to pause and think for a minute, I love the droid show. I can't wait to talk about it soon.
I prefer Ewoks.
I know.
Ewoks is better, but droids is underrated, but Ewoks is better.
Well, how can I not say Ewoks is better? Look at my icon. Look at him. Look at him. Look how perfect he is.
I look forward. I hope Marcel joins us when we talk about the droids and Ewoks shows when we get there.
I'm gonna have to rewatch the droids show. Oh God.
We'll watch it together. We'll do watch party.
I had no life over COVID, so anytime I was sick or down with the flu, I would just watch Ewoks, and I added it up, and I found out to my horror that I watched the entirety of the show 6 times in full. I really had no friends during that era of my life and was very lonely and bored. But it was time well spent. It was time well spent.
That was a bad time for everybody. I don't think anyone had a good coach.
I could have been watching Batman the Animated Series, but I was watching Ewoks. Yeah.
Maybe you could still do that though. You could still like.
But
I think droids has the better theme.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I do agree with that.
Droids just. We're talking about droids and Ewoks a lot now, but I think it just didn't have the time to fully realize its concept. But it has great ideas there right from the start. I really love it. The look of the show is great. The theme song is great.
I look forward to talking with everyone about that in quite a few episodes.
That's true.
But we'll get there.
We're jumping ahead a little bit.
Would I be allowed to ask, is A New Hope anyone's favorite Star Wars movie?
That's a perfectly valid question to ask. That's fine.
No, but I do still love it. That's not just because it's not doesn't mean it's like I look down. No, I still love it. I love all 3 of them almost equally, but Return of the Jedi I love a little more equally.
Yes, same.
Yeah, I think it's my favorite of the original trilogy. I like Revenge of the Sith. I think Revenge of the Sith is my favorite novel or my favorite movie. But
my favorite movie is Return of the Jedi or Attack of the Clones, which is controversial to a lot of people. But likewise, A New Hope's a little lower on my list, but I still love it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a great movie. click on A New Hope and it feels like you're curled up in a warm blanket by the fire. You know.
So
So
Brendan,
do we want
oh no, Robert, go ahead.
Sorry, what was the question?
Is A New Hope your favorite Star Wars movie, or where does it rank for you?
No, I think I'd probably agree with Al. I have a lot of affection for Return of the Jedi.
Same. Return of the Jedi would be my favorite of the original trilogy as well.
Me too. It's
That's
the
my
perfect
favorite
ending.
of all of them.
Even though I'll admit that I think that Episode 5 is probably technically objectively the better film. But as
Objectively
I
the
preference,
better
I'll
film.
put 6 above
It
5.
is also, it doesn't look like it was filmed off with a TV camera. I don't know if anybody's watched Return of the Jedi recently. It looks like George stole Friday the 13th's camera and started
Return
using
of the
that instead
Jedi-
of whatever good one they had. for
Return of the
Empire.
Jedi
It
looks
terrible.
the
I don't know
most-
what happened.
It looks the most like the, not just because of Endor, but it looks the most like the Ewoks made for TV movies out of all 6 of the original films.
It looks a little bit like it's made for TV. I can't defend that, but I still love it, despite the fact that it looks very cheap. I don't know what
I
happened.
Since
They
we're
spent all the money on the
it's-
puppets.
especially on
what is
Endor? I agree.
everyone's top 3 favorite moments from A New Hope?
Okay. Favorite moment from A New Hope is the attack against the Death Star. I think just the X-wings and everybody, chiming in on the squadron channel. I think that's just the best scene. I think very early on with Luke, and I'm not sure if it's the cantina scene where he goes in and he's like out of his element in the cantina. He sees all these aliens. That's a very good scene. And maybe with Obi-Wan, it's kind of hard to say a particular scene, but just Al Guinness and his character, I think, would be probably third.
I have to agree entirely with Scott. I suppose to be more specific, my favorite moment in the whole movie is when Han comes back and he says "Wahoo!" and that's I go nuts every time that happens. It doesn't matter how many times I've seen the movie, I still go nuts. When they go into the bar, specifically when you get all the shots of the sweet looking aliens,
Yes.
Yes.
it's too good. It's too good. And then the scene where Obi-Wan is explaining all of the stuff with the Jedi and how Anakin died. It's too good. But yeah, no, I agree. I 100% agree with Scott on all 3 of those, actually.
My
I love
top,
the jizz music in the cantina.
yeah, it's iconic. My top three moments are 3 would be the blowing up of the Death Star and Han returning to take out a couple TIE fighters. That's iconic, clearly. That's just such a feel-good moment because you had this feeling that Han's a good guy deep down, and seeing that, realize Han is the coolest character. My hero's not Luke. My hero's Han of the original trilogy. He exudes cool. It's Harrison Ford's
Classic case
performance.
of,
He's
Superman versus Batman.
sure, and Han is probably more of the Batman character, and I prefer it. So yeah, that's that Death Star attack, explosion, Han coming back. That's third. Second is the lightsaber duel between Obi-Wan and Vader. Lightsabers for the first time. That's the most iconic fictional weapon of all time. There's nothing that'll ever come close.
Phaser's got nothing on the lightsaber.
Ever. Yeah, phasers are dope, but lightsabers are the best. They're the coolest. And they're wouldn't be as cool if they were called laser swords. Lightsabers are just dope. I'm a Jedi guy. I think that's well known. I love Jedi. Any Jedi characters are going to be my favorite. When I was a kid, I had a notebook where I wrote down every Jedi in a list, and it was like 3 columns per page. And I would just write down any Jedi I found in comics in the EU. I didn't really know Wikipedia was a thing, and that would have been easier. But I would just write down any Jedi I had. I had like 4 pages, like 400 names on there, and
Awesome.
I just love Jedi. So seeing the lightsaber for the first time is iconic. That duel, that decision, run Luke, run, all of that's great. So that's 2. 1 is the Mos Eisley Cantina, because the other thing I love most about Star Wars, some people like the technology. I've always preferred the aliens, the alien life. We're in the planets far, far away. That's the way I lean. So my mind was blown when they step into that cantina and there's so many distinct different aliens. It just exploded my mind and opened my mind to so many possibilities. What's the story to this guy, this guy, this guy? They're all so unique and interesting looking. It immediately like just reeled me so into the world building. So the Mos Eisley Cantina, specifically just all of the costumed aliens, was my favorite part of the movie. So yeah, that's my 3.
Robert?
I don't know if I could pick a top 3, but a favorite of mine would probably be the scene where Luke returns home, finds what the stormtroopers have been up to, sees the charred bodies of Owen and Beru, and we see his understandably upset reaction to that.
That's fair.
That's a very that's arguably maybe the most pivotal scene in the entire film.
Though I will say to that, I appreciate the audio drama and way later on Heart of the Jedi for actually addressing that, because the film kind of completely glosses over such a horrific thing to happen to Luke, and he is more sad in the film over Obi-Wan's loss than he is over the people who have raised him his entire life. So I felt like that was always something that rubbed me the wrong way, and it was something that the EU fixed over for me.
This commenter brought up something that I can't believe I forgot about, but also should be maybe is also another one of my favorite moments, even if it's just like 2 seconds. It's the twin sons scene.
Oh yeah,
I can't believe I forgot about that.
Oh yeah,
it's so perfect. There's too much good stuff in the movie. I'm sorry. I forget all of the little interactions, like when Leia says, "I don't think he cares about anyone." She storms off, and Luke goes, "I care. I die every time I watch that scene. I die. I can't take it. It's too funny."
When Han's talking over the intercom, and he's like, "Everything's fine here."
Everything's fine. Fine. How are you?
It's
when
even
he's
funnier.
like, "No reward worth this." Every line of dialogue is a masterpiece. I'm sorry, people who don't like the dialogue. It's too funny. You can't top it. It's
a little
too
short for a stormtrooper.
The dialogue's
How
too
far
iconic.
usually?
It's too
6'1"?
iconic.
Anyway, what about you, Alex? What's your favorite moment of these?
The
Well,
medal
you guys just
ceremony is such a happy conclusion too. That's got to be up there.
It is. Everybody kind of said everything, so I wanted to make sure that this stream, I wanted everyone else to really shine and get their chances to speak. I like to be more in the background when I'm hosting something, but I will say for me, I am not much of an action guy, even when I'm watching an actiony film. The things I care about the most are characters and acting in general. So the scene with Obi-Wan introducing us and Luke to the world of Star Wars and the Force, and we talked about it earlier, we kind of already dived into it, but his ability to make reality out of something that never happened in his past with Anakin and everything, that always gets to me. Just seeing him, like, sit there as he's talking. He was the best star pilot in the galaxy and a good friend, and that's my favorite scene in the entire film for me.
It's valid.
And sorry,
No, go ahead.
earlier I brought up that Return of the Jedi deleted scene where Yoda says that that it wasn't Obi-Wan's fault that he didn't tell Luke the truth about this thing, that it was him that insisted that he keep it to himself. But yes, that scene from A New Hope, taken together with that scene from Return of the Jedi, you can sort of view it as him going, okay, he wants to know about his father. He should know something. What can I tell him?
Yeah.
Right.
What can I tell
It's like,
him?
what if I told him something different too? Like, you can kind of see. obviously Obi-Wan's dead at that point, but
Yeah.
you know, things could have changed had he told him something different, I guess.
But it's also like, now that you say that, it's like that was his best friend in the world. Like if we're counting episode 3 like that, you're my brother Anakin, right? But like, and this is essentially your nephew. Maybe not in legal binding, but you probably feel that way emotionally. How do you tell this kid about his father? You don't want to tell him negative things. This has no, he wants to hear good things. He doesn't want to be told, oh, your father's like this terrible person. So what are you going to tell him? So you tell him he's the best star pilot in the galaxy, cunning warrior, a good friend. Leave him with a happy thought. Instead of the revelations you get later.
True.
See, and this is all because of Alec Guinness's performance, that you can interpret or add in things that aren't necessarily there, but it's because of his acting and how good it is in that scene that you could kind of transfer that onto the scene. So I think that's just speaks to Alec. And I know Alec Guinness is kind of embarrassed that that's what he's most well known for, even though he was a well-established actor before Star Wars. But I always feel kind of hurt when actors feel that way. Or this is completely different in a video game, but like the guy that plays Trevor in GTA 5, he hates that that's like what he's known for because he does other things. But the guy that plays Michael is like, I'm so happy that if I walk on the streets and it goes, oh hey Michael, like it's just nice to be remembered.
It's like how how Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner. Nimoy was instantly like, oh yeah, Star Trek, and then Shatner was like, do I want to be known for this? And then later he kind of went to a convention because Nimoy told him to go, and then he was like, okay, this is cool. Yeah. But he didn't want to be Captain Kirk, beam me up, Scotty kind of guy.
Right.
He felt offended by it.
Yeah. But I think there's nothing to be offended by.
Nope.
And Alec Guinness is a great actor. I've seen a couple other of his stuff, but he is incredible regardless of the role. But he made, by being Obi-Wan and by putting him in that first film, he made wacky concepts for the time feel like you could take them legitimately.
That's very true.
Aspect to his performance.
How easily Star Wars could have fallen into like the 70s trope of like cheesy cornball, off the walls slop.
How easily could it have felt like Scooby-Doo, like mid-70s Scooby-Doo, where they're like the halfway through the Cher episode, the Sonny and Cher episode. You're like, ah.
Yeah. Well, I think we've kind of gone over everything we could say. I mean, there's always so much to say.
Are we gonna do? Can we mention the Imperial Troop Transport comic, or will we cover that later on when it comes out? It came out.
Probably cover it, but I don't know how much there is to cover.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
You can mention it for another episode for it. That's why I said.
Let's save it for the like a Marvel focused episode. We can get the comic.
Yeah. It came out a couple years later, right? So we're covering 76, 77, 78.
I think it came out 78.
We'll talk about it before we reach Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
That? We'll talk about it in amongst the Marvel stuff. It'll give something else to talk about too. And we're gonna do Maverick Moon and
of course
Mystery of the Rebellious Robot, of course. Those are classics. Arguably have more weight to their story than the original film.
I will say for source books, if there's a story that wants to be discussed, it has to be longer than a paragraph. Because I don't feel like it might get an honorable mention, but if it's just a paragraph, I don't feel like devoting too much time to it.
There are some short stories that are only like 2-3 paragraphs that are pretty solid that I think we can.
You just let me know. I'll make sure.
I'll let you know.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you all to coming to the very first episode. I hopefully a very long, years upon years venture. But I've now gone through the EU twice in chronological order by myself, and I'm getting sick of hearing myself in videos. So if I'm going to do this again, going through the EU, I want to do it in a different order and with other people that can lend their voices to it. Especially because there's some books that I don't like that other people will like, and that will be an interesting discussion. Or books that I like that other people don't. So I think it'll make for a more fun time with everyone. But thank you all so much for coming. It's been a pleasure. And I just appreciate you all for coming. I know that life can be busy, and it was a bit of a difficulty finding everybody's ability to show up, but I appreciate you all for taking the time. And next time we will be discussing. I don't know how many, but we're going to be discussing a lot of Marvel comics. So
Will we go by arcs? Like
Yeah,
2
we're
arcs
gonna
an
find out.
episode?
maybe
Wait,
that might be.
There's not really arcs in the Marvel comics. There's like 3 stories connected, and then that's the best you can get. They're all set on the same planet. Yeah, that one's.
Yeah.
We'll,
The-
find
we'll
out.
figure it out. We'll figure it out.
The Adobe 3 stuff is sort of an arc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess we'll aim for that one, eh, Alex?
Yeah, we'll start with that for now. Yeah.
Don't
I can't
spoil it.
wait.
Don't spoil it.
Green
So
rabbits.
Green rabbits, yes. You know what they say, tricks are for kids.
One more thing.
Okay, sure, go ahead, Robert.
Again, I haven't listened to the audio drama. There is one thing I do have to know, and that's, do they use the immortal line, "Did you hear a young noise blast through here"?
I don't recall.
I don't remember. I just
I don't
listened
think
to
so.
it.
I'm sorry.
There is an immortal line in the novelization. Obi-Wan asks Luke, there's some reference to a duck, and then Luke asks, "What is a duck?" Because obviously from that really, so that used to be the running joke back on the forums, and I think Nathan P. Butler, when he interviewed Alan Dean Foster, his first line to him was, "What is a duck?" And Alan Dean Foster had completely forgot he had written that. So Nathan thought it was kind of an awkward moment, but yeah, there's references to cats and dogs and like all
Yeah,
sorts of-
doesn't it?
Now
The
that you
novel
reference
mentions that Luke owned a dog in the novel. That's mentioned, I
wow.
think. Yeah.
There's that poster that I don't remember of that has like like ducks and dogs and cats and everything.
Oh,
on-
Cantina Communications. We'll have
Yes.
to discuss that another time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that'll be fun.
But just thought I'd mention it since it was on the same broad topic area. But yeah, till next
Tune in
time
next time to find out. Yes.
about the ducks, but not Howard the Duck, but a duck nonetheless.
Not Howard.
Bye-bye. Thank you.